180 degrees. Most institutions really want you to justify, gatekeep what you have, in the theory being that you put it up without metadata, without index in the directory. It'll never be found, it'll be piled, it'll look like the end of Citizen Kane or the end of Indiana Jones. You'll never see it again. And it's a near religious debate. So I buy into what Mr. Singh all up to predict humanity to rise from it. So the Internet Archive is ingesting a lot of data, something on the order of 17 terabytes. And we have something on the order of 40 petabytes, which is 40,000 terabytes of data. That includes the Wayback Machine and what people are giving us. We pull in 11,000 hours of radio a day. We pull in 120 channel satellite television a day. And of course, we are grabbing hundreds of millions of websites every day. And just kind of doing a generalized, like a sprint over as much of the net presence as we can. Well, that's visited once, 6 months guaranteed. People can submit them. So it's growing and it's large, but it's purely, like I said, a non-profit being run on a whim of a millionaire. But it's one of the more important projects, especially in Europe, when we're seeing information going away and different stories attributed to saying, well, it was never like this. And then the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine says, Brewster's a very feelings-driven person. So he will have projects that matter a lot to him. But, and this is what I've been telling people a lot, the saving grace of his management style is that if, am I still being heard? Yes? Good. If he gets shown something and nobody, and he doesn't understand it, he'll say, well, you know, as long as it doesn't embarrass us, as long as it's not too resource intensive, all right, I guess that's important to you. That's how we ended up with 3 years of Kmart recordings, where somebody gave us 3 years of weekly tapes that were sent to Kmart that were like, they play the music and play the announcements that were official. And he had like 180 of them or something. And so we put them up and they got millions, I will not kid you, millions of responses. So people really wanted it. And I, tried to explain that to Brewster. And he was like, okay, I guess that's important to people. Same thing when I started to gather in I discovered that there were all of these mechanisms for these freely given out hip-hop mixtapes, that the tapes that were passed around as cassettes in the 1970s and 80s have kind of morphed into these weird promotional CDs that are now called mixtapes, but they are more average than not 14 MP3s and a cover image in a zip provided for free from different record companies as a way to keep an artist's name in the zeitgeist between albums. So the album will come out in 2014 and 2016, and in 2015 there'll be some really funny named mixtape of like some freestyle raps or some early versions of songs that'll be on the later mixtape. Well, they're releasing like 40 or 50 of these a week through all the different organizations, and so I have a thing just grabbing them. And Brewster's not going to listen to any of them. But through his management style, he's like, I guess that's important. And so, of course, if it's a name, I'll get hundreds of thousands of people who play them because we just make them all available. Similarly, if you go through the Internet Archives, and it's archive.org, which I'm sure was mentioned, but if you go through the archives stores, the ethic of what he wants is he wants everything as readable as possible. In other words, like if you say to somebody, well, I've got it. I've got this album. I've got this new book. It's here in this .zip. To him, that's like, you might as well be telling them it's in your closet. He wants it that when you go to it, it says, okay, here it is in this zip, but here's a preview with the pages, and you can flip through the pages immediately and aesthetically understand what you're looking at. Same thing with the music. Here it is. Here's whatever. And okay, here it is, playable in FLAC form, in OGG form, in MP3 form. And he did it with movies. Boom, boom, boom. So when he hired me in 2011, he gives everybody a project. And of course, if you fail at the project, goodbye. But his project with me was, we've done this for movies, music, books, but we never did it for software. Can you do something with that? Turned out the project took about 3 years. I did other things, so he didn't think I was a total wastrel. But as a result, if you go to the archive, you can play software in the browser. And we did that by porting the MAME emulator, which is the largest emulator of its kind, into JavaScript, which I do not recommend, by the way. Don't do that. So, and also we did it, but it produces a relatively largish multi-megabyte JavaScript program that will emulate one of, I think right now we're supporting on the order of 50 or 60 platforms. But beyond that, we're supporting, 1,200 video games. We are currently emulating, Atari 800s and Apple IIs and Atari 2600s and console games. We recently started emulating handheld games like Simon and Speak and Spell. And we're also able to take MS-DOS and Macintosh. And the idea being here that it's one thing to say to somebody, oh, trust me, this .dsk is a floppy of this game called Chompers, believe me. And it's another thing to say, click here and now you're playing Chompers. Like, that instantaneous reaction, that feedback loop, means A, people tell me when we've done it wrong, but B, it enables people to turn all of digital history, especially computer software history, into a embeddable, clickable, referenceable object. So I believe about this, hit this button, now you're playing it. There was a look and feel case in 1982. It was Atari versus Magnavox. It's the famous look and feel case over Pac-Man, that Atari claimed that if your game was Pac-Man-ish, they owned it because they had licensed the home computer for one of the pieces of history that sometimes people don't know, and you are entirely entitled not to know this, is that part of what kept the Atari Corporation afloat from about 1980 through 1984 or 5 was the fact that when Nolan Bushnell was in charge of it, every time they innovated in any way, joystick, machines, whatever, he completely patented everything. So they patented joysticks, they patented screen processes. So when Nintendo comes out with their home game system, Atari sued them and won. And so Nintendo gave them millions of dollars, which kept Atari afloat. And they sued Magnavox and got lots of money and got royalties. So one of the side effects of this was that it murdered look-alike video games for a while. Like that was just so when you're like, wow, that's like, if you were to like look at them all the way, you go, wow, after like 1982, 1983, software companies stopped creating Munchman and space investors or whatever. They suddenly are all going to get sued, right? So you know that because I can say, okay, but on the other hand, that didn't stop shareware people, that didn't stop people in other areas from creating lookalikes. So for instance, on the archive, it's possible to search for like every Windows solitaire. Or one of the ones that really fascinates me is we have like 45 different calculators for Windows 3.1 that you can play with. And it's funny because you're like, it's free, it came with it. Why would you do that? And the answer is, well, there were people who made calculators for very specific things. And so the fact that you can do that. So Brewster has just let me run free on it, and you know, he doesn't know any video games. Like, it's funny, he remembers one video game because it was in the basement at MIT when he went to college there, and that's it. That's his entire video game over. He was too busy designing computer chips and doing other works to go to the arcade, I guess. But the fact that he allows it, so if nothing else, if you're overseeing people, and these people are like, I have a thing, and it's not in your mission, you're like, oh look, if it doesn't kill you, if it doesn't take you away from the stuff we're trying to do here, yeah, all right, let's see how it works. Because that's where, like, sometimes the most important things come out of, and you just later look back and go, oh good, oh it was that, and everyone just says, oh you did the whatever. So for the archive, it's the Wayback Machine. People are just like, oh, you're the Wayback Machine. I'm like, yeah, it's about 50% of what we're focusing all our energy on. And then they'll find out that we have, you know, 100,000 magazines, you know, of every strike that we've put up or that we've got. There's a site, here's a good example of like how deep it can go. There is a 20-year collection of the weekly shows of a radio show called Crap from the Past, which is basically a pop hits from 20 to 30 years before each episode, usually along a theme, like chicken, or highway driving, or elections. And then he'll like assemble like a bunch of pop songs and talk about it. And he had been uploading them himself, along with all of the show descriptions and everything, to the archive for like 4 years. We gave him a collection. He starts to assemble it better. He goes back and he gets all of the shows, even back to when he was running it as a college student in the 90s, and he puts it all up, and it's just sitting there. Like, to us, it's just another, you know, terabyte and a half. Okay, that's fine, that's great. But to him and to the people it cares about, it's the most important thing. It's because you can embed it, you can share it, you can do that. So, you know, one of the things that I work on besides, you know, the day-to-day archiving process, where I'm mostly taking or helping people who aren't familiar with the archive.org system to bring things into us, you know, where I'm talking to them. The other thing I do is outreach like this, where there's conversations going on. There's so many cases out there of people who have important things, and importance is a debate. But to me, if it's got some sort of vision of human creation, or represents you know, artifacts, a representational of some society or some piece of who we are, and it doesn't have any advocate, you know, like if you have, let me give a dumb example, like right now paintings have a lot of advocates. It's very hard to debate that old masters' paintings are worthless. Like, you can't bring up that discussion, right? You're like, yeah, we have some Rembrandts here. I say we toss them. We need that wall space. You know, you get choked out. But imagine a time when people were like, well, paintings, what? What is this for? Well, we can do so much better. And I see that with so many things which like just elicit a snort, like tapes of old live performances, or flyer pings, like flyer JPEGs from various revolutionary groups or various music groups or various sewing groups. There's a guy who, in 2002, he took a stack of spam faxes and took them home so his kids could draw on the white side of the paper. And they drew on some of them, but didn't draw on the rest of them. And this year he digitized them, 500 different spam faxes from 2002 for the UK. It was in London. And we put them up as a flippable book, as an evidence. And in it is amazing because they've got these, how do I put it? They've got these questions in them. Okay, so looking back, right? There were phone numbers you could call that cost like $1 a minute or $2 a minute, right? Every country had this, right? So what they would do is they would spam fax you and say, basically, immigration. Should we be having foreigners? Call this number for yes. Call this number for no. And anyone who called, that was $3. So you just made people angry and then made $100 grand, right? And what's funny, of course, is that it's English. So one of the questions was fox hunting. Should fox hunting be illegal? But again, it's like this real indication. Like I said, 2002, computer prices. It's got all these get your computers for this amount. What models of computer there were. What places were worth vacationing at. All of that kind of like gets pulled along with these spam faxes. And to me, it's like, I don't even understand disk space anymore. It's not a very healthy way to be. So someone will be like, you don't understand, it's 23 gigabytes. And I'll be like, oh man, I uploaded 23 gigabytes by mistake yesterday. So, no, go ahead, send it to me, man. That's fine, that's cool. And so I find that there's a lot of people out there who have the first part of the narrative. They've gathered something, and it matters to them. And in our letter, bearing in mind I can hear none of you now, it's completely silent, but I was told that you guys have found some caches of historical material, and a lot of times people are paralyzed. Like they have something that represents, they know it's important. Like it's all the newsletters of their user group, or it's all the documentation for something their company created, but then they're like, but who cares? Who do I call? We don't have a clearinghouse number. There's a thing that happens with Michael Moore, the documentary filmmaker. The vast majority of calls to his office are not about films, but it's about labor action. And the reason being that he has talked so much, and his movies have had so much about labor action, that places just call him and go, we're a group, we want to unionize, we're in Mississippi, what do we do? And his people have a list of numbers. And I get that from people who are like, I have this ancient pile of blank, who do I talk to? And I've had to build a list of this game museum, this computer museum, this technical group, and so on. I've tried to get out of the business of taking it on personally, but the archive has, so we have what we call our physical archive, and I'm not allowed to use the phrase warehouse. I guess he thinks it has it's a warehouse. And so there's 2 warehouses in California that we have. It's like a couple 100,000 square feet. And inside it are shipping containers full of books and materials and software and tapes and film. And so when we digitize books, we'll keep a copy of the book whenever we can. So we'll have all these books in there. We have donations from people that will come by the truckload, and then we process them and say, okay, we have all this, we don't have this, we'll take it in. We have scanning centers all over the world. We have something like 30. Many of them are partnerships with places like the Library of Congress, Boston Public Library. We have one in London, we have one in China, and where people are digitizing books, and we're making deals where we'll digitize their books for free, give them a copy of their books that have been digitized, and also keep a copy for ourselves to put up on our site. We have a lot of those. We have a scanning center in Hong Kong that does audio CDs, and so people will contact us if they know about us, or they'll say to me, hey, loud clown on Twitter who talks about archiving, I've jumped into this, I found, a buddy of mine is getting rid of, 7,500 videotapes recorded in a nightclub across 10 years. Do you want it? And I'll be like, emotionally, no, but I will absolutely help you find the home for it, and I will, So we've had people who had, massive amounts of taped news programs. We've acquired, there was somebody who, okay, so here's one that's kind of sad. I'm still figuring out how to not make it sound sad, but it's sad. The story of the guy was that he basically downloaded everything off of Usenet, everywhere he could, mostly involving video and audio. So like every album, every movie, and he downloaded them for like 6 years, and he would burn them onto CD-ROMs, and then he would run this codec appliance, whose name I remember is offensive, but I can't remember why or how. But anyway, it's a codec evaluator, so it'll say, oh, this is an MP4 running at this kilohertz for the audio, and and he would write it on the CD cover, like, contains this with this. And he made like 11,000 of these and then died. Like, that's all he did for years, is download Usenet, right, and then died. And so the only reason I even know about this is because one of his neighbors knew about the Internet Archive, knew about me, and sent me a picture of these 11,000 CDs moved to a basement. So it's just sitting in a basement, big pile of them. And he's like, maybe you guys want them? And I'm like, yeah, I'll take them. And I've been transferring stuff off those CDs. I don't need what he wrote on them. Like, he provides no information. There's nothing. It's not like he wrote his review of the movie. It wasn't like he added context, like I downloaded this for this reason. It was just literally what would be on the CD that could be derived from the actual file and nothing else. So I've been transferring them off into terabytes of disk space, storing them aside, and donating the CDs to artists to use for artwork, like just shiny. Artists are like crows. They love shiny glass things that they can smash into other things. So giving it off to artists and providing them with some fodder and then saving it. But this guy's work, literally his life's work, and they're, by the way, they're terrible. Like, the movies are terrible. Like, for all the threat perceived, these are like, 400 by 200 MP4s of a action adventure movie from 1997, preserved forever in this guy's collection in that form. And there's stuff to be learned from, I guess, how the piracy groups did things, the codecs that existed. They certainly work good as testing fodder for audiovisual preservationists who I deal with. Like, if you were working on a brand new codec evaluator or anything, oh man, do I have some data for you? I have a corpus for your programming, your machine learning to do. But I don't know. But I'm also not going to be the person who decides it all disappears either. So I've done it. But this guy was an archivist. He thought he was an archivist. He was doing his work. He was saving it. I don't know what world he was trying to build with it. I didn't have a chance to interview him. I don't know his thinking. There's probably some insight to be gathered from that. But those are the kind of stories I'll run into every once in a while, and he just didn't know who to talk to. I feel like if he had talked to more people, he would have been like, I really don't need to be doing this all day, all night, I certainly don't need to be writing stuff down on the at least when I'm doing a repetitive thing, I try to watch something. So I'm almost through Altered Carbon. It's just try to move and produce at least one or two accomplishments while I'm doing something. I'll do some repetitive work, in terms of I'll rip a lot of CDs. I'll pull in a lot of floppies. We've just been ripping hundreds and hundreds of floppies this month. And, the items that we're getting good read amounts, so that's fine. We're getting near 100% success with these 3.5-inch floppies. I do not know the value of the items on them yet. I might not for some time. I'll just have this 600 meg chunk of computer history, this digital history, and we won't know the value until later. And I can always cherry pick you, we've put up thousands of cover CDs, these CDs that would be on the cover of game magazines, try this new game. Because of the publishing schedule of 1990s games, you might have a case so for a game to come out in Christmas, it's got to be in a gold master by September so it can go to the manufacturer to get in line, because they're all doing it. So your game has to be finished by September. But you want to preview the game in like October in, you know, Blinken Lights Gamers magazine. They'll have a 2-month lead on their CD cover. So you have to produce a demo in June while you're rushing to finish your game by September. And the way they would often do this is they would take whatever flaming horsecrap version of the game there was, cut out the levels, sometimes just by knocking out they'll leave the bits in there, but they'll knock out like any way to get to them. And then handing that flaming wreckage over to the publisher. Meanwhile, in those June, July, August, September, in those 4 months, they change game mechanics, they change menu approach, they replace graphics. So sometimes on these CDs, we have now discovered, are versions of the game that exist nowhere else in life, with unused sprites, unused writings. In one case, they included an emulator in the file directory because they were doing some other piece, so there was an emulator. Or their source code. There was one, I love that they had like a little zip file, and the zip file had all the source code to the game that was on the cover, just because somebody forgot to take that out of the subdirectory. So we don't know what's going to be these values going forward. I functionally have been responsible for. There was a shining moment, I think, 2 or 3 years in, where I was 2% of all of the data on the archive outside of the Wayback Machine. Just for a little short time, I was the only organization that had more stuff up there than me was China. Like the Chinese Scanning Center had more than me, and that was it. So I was like, this is it, this is perfect. And nowadays, scripts do a lot of my work for me, but I've never, I can't think of any time that I've regretted putting something up or making it available. I will acknowledge that some of them have a labor cost that may or may not be borne out anytime soon. But I've discovered, this digital hoarding approach that I'm accused of tends to work pretty well, works out pretty well. It turns out there's historical value that we don't even know yet. So I could keep talking about all the crazy, cool things, but I'll tell you that right now, what has me excited and where I've moved, which is where we have a film archivist named Rick Prellinger, and the Prellinger archives are relatively famous for having like Duck and Cover and a whole variety of government PSA type films. So films about VD and hygiene and going to war and whatever. And they're interesting, right, in their own context. But he kind of stopped actively going after those. He went after and has continued to go after home movies because he realizes that they're advocateless. They have no organization that says, we can't wait to do home movies. And he has found incredible value because home movies have no script. So they're not beholden to put up a certain imagery. So a home movie of a family around a part of San Francisco that otherwise doesn't have any footage, or a recording of some place or event or store that burned down a month later. So he's been discovering that. To a more direct one, the banner example is last year they recovered a home movie shot in a Japanese internment camp where they actually had an 8mm camera, and here they are playing baseball and going to the barracks and talk. So it's all this recording, and then we brought out the guy who was 4 years old in the video, who's now 80, and he talked about what it was like for him, what he remembers about it. So that connection. So in that way with me, I have been less, people will go to me and say I have all these PS2 games. And I'll be like, well, thank you. I'll take them. I'll take PS2 games. I'll take PS4 games. I'll take and I'll take Atari and I'll take others. But I'm very worried about like individual user groups who created like all these amazing toys and things for each other, not for a commercial benefit, but to solve problems or to demonstrate something, and acquiring those home movies in computer software, or flyers done for a relatively small group that are sitting in a stack. These kind of things are, like I said, advocateless. They don't sell themselves necessarily. There's nobody who steps in and says, well, on principle, I should archive these. And those are the ones I'm really kind of like seeking out now. So part of the reason why I do those experiments, like putting up AOL CDs or Kmart tapes or hip hop music, is so that people will say, well, if he'll take that, maybe he'll take this stack of 105 blank that I have because nobody wants it. And I'll be like, yeah, actually, I do want that. There's a guy who is a photographer. And if you've been on Wikipedia, you might have noticed his work. He tends to take a lot of, his deal is like he takes very professional photographs of extremely mundane things. But he'll do it, and I think there's like a real value in this. Like he'll photograph every kind of candy. Like he'll just keep going to the store, buying every candy, and making a full professional photograph of it. Old computer hardware, old console hardware. And he'll take like really extensive photos of it under ideal conditions, because it is sometimes surprising what we haven't. You'd think there would be, right? Like when we put up every PlayStation game, which we've done. We've put up every PlayStation 1 game. Don't tell anybody. And we wanted covers for every PlayStation game. Well, there aren't. Like, some PlayStation games have no cover on the internet. That's really strange to me. Like, what an amazingly commercial product of relatively recent vintage. And there's no scan. And if there is a scan, it's a thumbnail or it's from a catalog. And you realize, wow, we didn't even do that right. So to me, there's no downside to aggressively going after things that don't even get that far. Like I can complain that like of 2,500 PlayStation games that we have up, maybe 100 don't have good covers now. But there are places where like we don't even get as far as having all the programs up, or all the flyers up, or all the pieces up. There's a lounge. Nightclub really in San Francisco called the DNA Lounge, and he keeps 2 weeks of recordings off the soundboard up on the site and then takes them down. And I contacted him. I said, I bet you have every recording. He goes, well, yeah, of course I do. Let's put them all up. Let's see what happens. And he's like, okay, all right, we'll get cells together. And that was like 5-6 years ago. We've put up 4,000 shows of each one being 4 or 5 hours long, of like every band that's ever gone through there. You know, everybody from Nina Hagen and Front 242 to Prince to every electronica to every punk and Guar and whoever else, you know. And this full-on recording, it's like the whole show for like 4 hours. Everything from the music they played beforehand to the announcements being made in between songs. To, you know, it's this full-on recording, and it's got its own inherent value that we can't even recognize yet. So that's kind of where. So that's where I am in terms of how I am. But like I said, I can keep talking after this, but I don't think that's very. So answer some questions.
Cool. Yeah, I mean,
anybody has kind of lingering.
We've got about 10 minutes, and
Sure.
does anybody have any questions? We got one hand back there. I mean, go get her the mic.
Thank you. This is amazing. I'm Heather from Austin, Texas, and I work at Vortex Theater in Austin, Texas. I'm an ACTLab from, 15 years ago. And I just got a grant to do an archival history of our 30 years of doing live performance in Austin, Texas from the UT Humanities Center. I'm not an archivist, I'm a director, I'm a producer, I'm a writer, I'm a development director. I love archives in general. So we have so much material. The artistic director has collected everything over the years. Everything from the flyers, the programs, to costume pieces, headdresses, everything like that. And it's a multi-layered project that's going to end in a book. But right now, what I'm trying to do is find reputable resources that I can, first of all, get all of our slides, because she took pictures of everything and they're on slides. You know, I mean, we can get a slide scanner, but it takes forever. But I also want to figure out a way, maybe with photographs, maybe 3D style photographs of all of the gigantic cybernetic headpieces that we have, and some of the original costumes. I mean, it is a rich collection, and I am in brand new territory pretending that I know what I'm doing for the grant purposes. So I really appreciate everything that you said, and what we plan to do is we plan to put everything online. We want to be like Vortex 21st century, let's do the next 30 years. This is where we came from. This is our chronological history. And we actually are the premier alternative arts venue in Austin. And we were doing stuff way before anybody else was in the city. So there's some of that I'm trying to capture. Anyway, any advice you have on that, especially as far as like, where do I ship off all of the flyers and programs and everything? Because we're a nonprofit, we don't have the time and labor to scan it all ourselves. But we got a little bit of money to invest in that.
Sure. So there's multiple ways to go about this. The first one is to be very communicative, both on your side and out as much as possible, that people know this exists in a functional way. In other words, the worst narratives I always get, the ones where it's like, oh yeah, no, he had all 700 recordings in his apartment, but then he died and his niece came in and cleared it. Like, because he didn't have any support network. But the more people who know that it exists and making reference to it and offline and off, that you mention it, like, hey, did you know this? Or even, believe it or not, like taking some cell phone photos of like the storeroom, being like, oh, guess what? We have all these here. It'd be really great to digitize them someday. We really hope to photograph it. And by doing that, you cause a viral narrative that people can share and be like, oh wow, because then it kind of gets in the way of, or the face of places. You find out there's an organization. The archive, sometimes the archive comes off, some people, because we're so good at our promotion, it's like this incredible digitization machine, like just drop a truck of headdresses into the front door and it comes out as a series of PDFs. And we're moving at whatever rate we're moving at, which is not, in some cases, very fast. But one of the things that is out there, especially I would think in Austin, is you'll find out that like there might be a group of volunteers who are more than happy to come in on a regular basis, take a bunch of slides, do the slide process, they're producing it. Places like the archive are then happy to post the bit. But I can also, if you want, you can always, my email for everyone is jscott, JSCOTT @archive.org. I'm always happy to like get the word out and see if we can find volunteers, because I have some very powerful volunteers for various projects, and now you in ideal situations, there's a local, and the local, watches television while quietly putting slides into a slot thing and just digitizing the night.
I did that for about 800 photos, and we've got probably at least 3,000 more.
Right, that's what you need.
Yeah.
Finding volunteers to do that might be easier than you think, but like in the short term, it's really important that people even know the contingency exists. People always assume that everyone knows something.
Right.
And then you find out, oh yeah, 6 doors down, they're like, what do? We have this slide scanning machine, nothing to do.
So is there anyone else that has a question? Anybody? Oh, Chris, go ahead.
I don't know if you can see me over here, but so I was curious on some of the you said you practically embedded some emulators onto the actual JavaScript website.
Sure, that's sort of what I said. Yes.
Gotcha. So cool. Yeah, I've got like started to kind of compile like early '95 big box games and stuff like that, and they're really hard to get running on modern PCs. And so, is that like some of the stuff that y'all have on your all's archive website?
Sure. So, there are two models for emulation on the web right now. I do one of them. There's another group does another. We're both valid. We don't hate each other, not that much. And then in their approach, so in my approach, we port the emulator to JavaScript WebAssembly, and so that way there's no. They can continue to innovate the emulator, and it just becomes, can run in a browser. It has flaws. It's hard to do image swapping. It's hard to do a bunch of things, but it's generally functional, right? On their group, it's called Emulation as a Service, and Emulation as a Service had a machine, a virtual machine running somewhere, and it's pumping out the PNG stream to a client on your browser. So I call it like Netflix virtual. And it runs everything. Its only problem is it doesn't scale, because I announced, this was catnip at the time. We announced, okay, we just put up 1,200 video games, everything from Nintendo and Atari and Sega. It's up on the web for free. We had 3 million people visit 4 days. And we handled it because it was giving them the work. All of their machines had to do the processing. The emulation as a service, they can only do like 100 or 120 people simultaneously. But I suspect that that's where it's going to head, is you will take on your machine, it'll boot up a Kubernetes or another virtual system. That system will have image on it. That is your machine, and then it runs in a window on your machine, either by emulator or by a client. And then you're manipulating that machine. And we will see in the future more and more preformed images that you either acquire or rent or otherwise, however they do it. So that, like, Windows 95 bot would have a sound blaster in it. It goes, book, and then I have to install this on it, and it'll do it. There's always the copyright piracy question. There's always the question of some of the easiest ones to work with are the cracked versions. The cracked versions often lack features because they were cracked. That's a fidelity issue. That's bootleg versus downboard recording. But I think that feature will continue and is going to get stronger and stronger, that we will, one way or another, have virtual environments running or older software. I'm very bullish on it, as they say.
So Jason, we just let us give you a round of applause. Thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us. Everything you said was amazing. I really enjoyed it. Even Chris's question, it got me going about thinking about, like you said, the Sound Blaster or ACTLab, sound card, and then MIDI, and playing MIDI back, and all the different, versus Roland versus the Sound Blaster's MIDI versus the Yamaha, chips, and you can get really finite, Chris, just so you know about what people consider the correct way to do it. And so thank you so much.
No problem. By the way, we emulate, so we're able to use whatever emulation system they have, and one of the things that will shock people, and this is something that if you experience life a certain way, that becomes the canonical way that everyone experienced it. It's just it's how we're built as humans. So there were a couple games where I booted them up in my emulator, and I'm like, yeah, this is like I remember it. But I was testing the disk image, and I booted it on an emulator that had a different sound card. And there was this game I'd known for 20 years. There was this crazy soundtrack and background. never heard this song in my life. And apparently, like, if you had this card installed in your Apple II, it had a whole other soundtrack experience. And me, as expert, Mr. Knows the Game, life is like that. You just sort of, wow, it wasn't that way for everyone. So it's fascinating, and it can consume your life, so be careful.
Well, thank you so much, and we hope you have a wonderful day. And
Thank
we
you.
really, really enjoyed your talk. You have a great day.
All right.
All right, bye-bye. So let's take a 5-minute break real quick.